All right, so folks, we're back in the Fitsnews studios. Wanted to update our readers. We've got a lot of big news breaking this week. We'll be up in Greenville, South Carolina later this week for some big stories. But before we get into that, if you've been following our news outlet lately, we've been publishing a lot of stories about the upcoming session of the South Carolina General Assembly. The 125th session of the legislature is about to gavel to order. That'll be coming up here on January the 10th. And as we get ready for that session, we've been speaking with a number of members of the South Carolina legislature, folks who have been elected in recent years or folks who have been in the chamber for a long time. But today it's our pleasure to welcome to the studio a newly elected state lawmaker from York County, District 48, Brandon Guffey.
Thank you for having me, Will.
Yeah, man. And first of all, I got to say, the goatee, man, I'm very jealous. You're rocking a killer goatee over here, man.
It's one of them things that many people say I should shave off, but the wife likes it, so it stays.
That's what I had in mind. Absolutely. You're a smart man. Before we get going, I know we've got a big issue we're going to talk about here in a minute, one that's incredibly serious, one that's incredibly prevalent, and one that's getting worse in our culture. I'm talking about the epidemic of sextortion. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about your work on that and, more importantly, your experiences on that. But before we get there, I want to just get a sense of this session. We're talking about this upcoming legislative session. What's been your impression so far of Columbia and of your colleagues in the General Assembly?
Of course, it's like drinking from a fountain. Trying to learn. I'm seeing, I guess you'd say, the politics firsthand. And the way I tend to explain it is I see a lot of virtue signaling and less virtue. And I would like to see people that have similar beliefs. I've always had more of a libertarian approach. And I would like to see people fight for liberty without just posturing for liberty. So I'd like to see some real changes be made.
Well, let me ask you this. There's been a lot of discussion lately about this new Republican supermajority in the South Carolina House of Representatives where you serve. As you look at that supermajority, what percentage of it would you say is acting in a manner consistent with those principles you talked about?
I'm one of those that doesn't really like the term rhino, and the reason I don't like it is I believe the right uses it just like the left uses racist, and it's lost all meaning. Mm-hmm. But I believe that there are certain districts where I would much rather have a moderate Republican as opposed to a Democrat in that seat. I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but there's plenty of districts where it's 50-50. And I would much rather have more of a moderate Republican there that's going to agree with me on 20% of things than someone that I'm going to disagree with the majority of the time. So I understand, and I've learned that from council. Whenever I was on York County Council, I learned that I was typically the far right, I guess you would say.
Sure.
I'm not a fan of zoning laws at all.
Okay.
So I simply believe in less government. I think the more government touches things, the worse it gets, the more it costs. I think it kind of kills everything. So whenever I look at it, there's many districts that are extremely conservative, but their view of what they call conservatism might only be Christian values, but yet they're all for government overreach. Me, I'm a conservative Christian personally, but I have more of a libertarian approach whenever it comes to politics.
Do you think that's and let me tell you, I'm singing off that same sheet of music from where I sit in my view of political ideology. But let me ask you this: the folks you're representing, is that kind of where they're coming from as well? Do you feel like that's the representation they're looking for?
I don't know that I could. I think my district is extremely conservative. It is the district that is the seat that was held by Ralph Norman.
Right.
So, you went from Ralph Norman to Bruce Bryant to me. And, that's one of the reasons I was elected to county council, was because I am conservative. But it depends on your definition of conservatism. Nowadays, I see a lot of people say, well, you're not a real conservative because you disagreed with me on this or you disagreed with me on that. And they just want to call you a rhino or they want to call you whatever it is. And I'm one of those people, I didn't grow up with much. So whenever you attack my name, you're attacking me personally, and I take it personal. I'm a little bit different than most politicians in that regard. I'm not one of these people that believe politics is just a game and you got to, make this move to make this happen. I believe in being upfront, honest. If I don't like you, I'll tell you to your face. I don't like you, but I can agree with you on this and we can work together on it.
Man, well, that sounds like something we need a lot more of, having covered this chamber for a long time. So I wish you well.
We'll see how well it serves me.
No doubt, yeah. Well, And I want to ask you about this. And before we get into this sextortion issue, a lot of lawmakers file bills. A lot of lawmakers hold press conferences and give interviews about their bills. But this is a bit different than that for you, isn't it?
This isn't political. This is personal.
And I want you to tell us the story.
July 27th of this year, right after I had a runoff in my primary, my son committed suicide. And
Gavin.
yes, my son Gavin Guffey, just graduated high school, about to start college. And he was at the point in his life, he had just come back from a Christian camp, announced publicly on social media, which is not common for teens, how he had Jesus in his heart, and his life was so much better. But he was diagnosed with COVID, so he was on quarantine and kind of stuck in his room. On the final day of quarantine, I'd come in from a local York County delegation meeting and was speaking with other political people around the county about the issues. So I didn't come in until about 1 o'clock. And I was laying in the bed just kind of replying to some emails. And at 1:30, he walked out of his room. And I thought it was odd because it was quiet, and walked up to go check on him. And he ended up killing himself at that time. And come find out what happened was he was being extorted, being blackmailed. And that's something, there's still an ongoing investigation, so I'm careful about how much I can give. But I can tell you that it's given me a passion. I tell people, sometimes God has to give you a Goliath to bring out the David in you. Prior to this in politics, everything was things that I still view as important. I'm a big term limits person. That's something I've always ran on. I'm a big pro-life person. I think I might be the only person to ever run for county council on a pro-life platform. But whenever something like this happens, all of those things, while important, are not nearly as important as what I'm seeing happen right now with this sextortion. And no one talks about it. The people that survive it are too ashamed to say anything about it. We're seeing a rise in suicide across this country, and we're seeing suicide without suicide notes. I believe a lot of that is linked to the sextortion. So what people do is they pretend, like in my son's case, he's about to go off to college. This girl contacts him that is in college, and they start chatting, and all of a sudden she sends over some pictures and some compromising videos, and he's thinking that this is a girl he's about to meet, and he decides he's going to send some pictures. And as soon as he does, they come back and start blackmailing him for money. And it's hard to say, but I do believe that if I wasn't in politics, I believe that my son might have approached it differently. But we had a very hard-fought campaign, and I constantly told them I didn't have much to give them in life, but what I did have was a name, and for them not to ruin it. And I think a lot of what I said, the life lessons of man up instead of showing your emotions and being vulnerable, I think all of that just kind of come in on them at one time. And what I found... You
sound like you're blaming yourself a little bit.
Well, there is some blame. I don't think that you can look at improving... Now, I don't blame myself, but you cannot retrospectively look at something and truly make a change without seeing how you could have changed. There's hundreds of things that I could have done different. I say that I was a great father. That doesn't mean I couldn't have been better. And those are things that are making me a better father with my other two boys. My wife only seen me cry prior to this maybe 3 times in our entire marriage. Once whenever my son was born, once whenever we were having some marital issues, and then once whenever my son died. Mm-hmm. And that's because I was always under the mindset that men don't cry. Yeah. You man up and you get over it. And as soon as he committed suicide, the first thing I'm thinking is that I have ruined him because he wasn't able to share emotions. Since then, I've learned it's a lot deeper than that. Some of the statistics on suicide, more than half of them are impulsive. The one that shocked me the most, that is within 20 minutes of someone making the decision and committing the act, that they attempt suicide. Wow. More than 90% are unsuccessful unless there is a weapon involved. Mm-hmm. And if there is a gun involved, that time period goes down to 3 minutes. And in my son's case, that's about how long it was. And I'm typically a person that keeps weapons locked up. It was just a perfect storm of why the weapon was not locked up at that time. It was put up into a kind of a secretive high place to where my 4-year-old couldn't get to it. But everything just happened, like I said, in a perfect storm. Within that 24 hours, he was able to get that weapon and chose to end his life instead of speaking with me. And I'm trying to get the word out primarily to teens. What I'm viewing this sextortion case is, and I think the problem with our country as a whole is we've forgotten grace. We're too busy at pointing at other people's failures to bring ourselves up instead of admitting I'm a failure. Not only have I failed, I will continue to fail. And what we need to seek is grace. We post our best pictures online. We act like our lives are so perfect, and yet our teens cannot live up to that. We also tell them anything you do online will stay with you forever, and this can be used against you. And something like that, just, they don't feel like they can get over it. I equate it to, in the 80s, we preached abstinence a lot in schools. All the teenagers were having sex, for the majority of them, but we were really preaching abstinence. And then the one girl would end up pregnant, and everybody would point at her and call her names and everything else and shame her. In this situation with the sextortion, I believe it's the same way. These kids, everyone's sending pictures back and forth. It's just part of their culture. Their entire lives are online. And as parents, we can't just say no social media because there's always some new out. We can't say, we're going to protect you 100% because we can't keep up with technology the way that they do. And I honestly believe these social media companies are to blame. I don't think that they're doing enough. Elon buying Twitter showed us one thing, and is they're more concerned about profits and the number of users they have than they are about weeding out the fake profiles. Facebook, Meta, if you send me a friend request, I can choose block this person and any new profiles that they create. But if I pull a warrant on your profile, they shut down that profile, and you're able to continue on with the other ones. And until I can prove that there's a reason to open a warrant for them, I still have to wait 30 days.
It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah. And they're protecting. And it's not just them. It's the VPN companies that allow you to, do things anonymously. It's these virtual payment companies. I mean, they almost work as Swiss banks. On making it to where you can't really track the money.
It's like a cottage industry that
I was
supports.
surprised. Out of all of them, Cash App seems to be the easiest to track, and I thought that it would be. I thought that it would be the hardest to track because I viewed it as kind of the cricket in the cell phone arena. I viewed it as the one that everyone uses, but it wasn't like the most secure. And what I found is it seems to be a lot better and more transparent.
Looking at some of the numbers, and I want to go back to your personal story because, again, I think that's why this matters.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned before when we started talking, you mentioned how you're balancing that need for justice for your son.
Yes.
But then this bigger issue, you want to try to keep it from happening to others. And I noticed one of the things I noticed in researching this a little bit, there's been a 98% spike in sextortion incidents over the last year, according to the DOJ.
Those are just the ones that's being reported.
Right, just the ones we know about.
I mean, I've had many people reach out and say that they went to report it, and whenever they went to report it, the officers tell them, well, there is a law that states that the teen can be charged for sharing images. And whenever that happens, they choose not to press charges.
So they're afraid not only of what are mom and dad going to say, what are our neighbors going to say, but also...
Will I get in trouble?
And it seems, I read an FBI warning that was issued back in April of this year on this very issue, said the primary target range for these sextortion scams, individuals, males, between the ages of 14 and 17.
Yes. That's because they're easy targets.
Yeah.
I say I'm 42. My brain still doesn't operate the way that it should at times. But as a teenage male, you're sitting there and all of a sudden, you might not be getting the attention at school and someone sends you a message and they're showing you attention. They're an easy target. And if I'm someone extorting someone, I could send out 10 of those messages, get 10 and 5 of them, get them to send me images, and they each send me $200 to keep it quiet, and I can move on with my day. And I can continue to try to extort them for additional money because that's what they do. It never ends.
It never stops.
And continue to try to extort them. And it's just money that's coming in. I think there's an entire criminal network. In my son's case alone, I know there's 3 states that arrests are being made in.
Wow.
And I truly believe that generated from out of the country originally. But we're having to start from the back, and it's so difficult when dealing with these tech companies. I almost feel like they're protecting the criminal instead of allowing us to seek justice. And, writing this bill, to me, is not something that I feel like the people that are extorting are coming out of South Carolina. If they do, I want to make it punishable. And not only that, I want to really make a statement with it. But it's more about drawing the attention to get the word out to these parents to say, this is a real issue. I use this as an example today. If the FBI, as they did 3 days ago, come out and issued a press conference and said, your kids are going to be at home. However, people are coming into your kid's bedroom and they're either sexually abusing them or they're causing them to commit suicide, and they issued that warning, that would be national headlines and everyone would be talking about it. But that's exactly what they're doing with the sextortion. They're coming into our children's lives through video games, through social media, however it may be, and we cannot stop it from happening. The only thing we can do is educate our children about it and let them know, regardless of how bad you think you've screwed up, you can come to me, and we will get this solved.
Well, tell us a little about the 3583 is your bill introduced last week, I believe.
It was.
And referred to the House Judiciary Committee. Tell us a little bit about what the legislation would do to address this issue.
Well, one of the things is I wanted to make sure we had a difference of age. So there's an age gap, so you don't have some 18-year-old that's talking to a 16-year-old and they're being punished to the fullest extent. But whenever I felt like it was important to say that if you targeted an at-risk adult or a child, then I wanted a minimum sentence of 15 years, a max of 30. And I understand typically South Carolina's not big on minimum sentences.
You got that
and
right.
I understand that. However, I challenge anyone to look at me in my eyes and tell me that my son taking his life over this was not worth at least 15 years in prison. Like I said, this isn't political. This is personal. I'm a very personable person. I take everything personal. So we'll see how well politics serves me, but I can't imagine this being a bipartisan issue. This should be something, I can't imagine anyone saying that they are against it. I could see some changes that they may want to make, and bottom line is we need to get something on the books because there's currently nothing on the books. The only thing that they can charge someone with, the only thing that really matters that they can charge someone with is distributing pornographic material.
But as you mentioned, that could implicate, in this case, some of the victims.
Right. A good defense attorney, a good lawyer, legislator might come after that teen as well.
Absolutely.
And that's unacceptable in my opinion. I mean, there's many things. There's only 2 bills that I've signed on to. One was the fentanyl, which is a major issue with the fentanyl drug bust up in York County, and this sextortion. I do plan on co-signing on some others. I think it's 3004 says that if you are committing blackmail and it results in a death, then you will be charged with involuntary manslaughter. So I would love to see that happen. I don't know why that hasn't passed. There's many things, and there's big issues in the state, and I completely understand that. But nothing is more important than putting a law on the books to protect our children that does not currently exist.
When also you bring this larger point, whether it's these companies, whether it's our legislative system, whether it's our courts, in too many cases, whatever the issue, the impetus is to protect the victimizers, not the victims.
I think lawyers have a good way of justifying whatever they do. I mean, that's their job. But me as a father, it's my job to protect that child. And I can promise you I'm more passionate about protecting my child than you are about protecting that criminal. And at the end of the day, common sense has to win. You can't look at it as if I have this case down the road, how will I approach this? You've got to look at what is best for the citizens of South Carolina. How do we put a stop to this? Let's not jump through the hoops. Let's not sit here and play political games. You know, one of the things that I thought was silly was I wanted to name this Gavins bill just in memory of my son.
Sure.
Very important to me. And I find out that if it goes to the Senate with the name Gavins bill on it, then it'll get thrown out just because it's named, because the Senate has a rule of not having any named bills. to me, it's not important. It's not as important to have Gavin's name on it as that is. But those are those, being a freshman down there, those are a lot of those political rules and games that I have to play that, in my mind, just lack common sense. And I think that's something that I want to call a spade and be me. And hopefully I won't offend too many people in doing so and can get things passed.
But thank you for being willing to do this and coming in and speaking with us. I know it's still hard. And one last question. Your family, how's your family?
As good as can be. I have this purpose, so it's allowing me to progress. And I'll say, people ask me all the time, I don't know how you're dealing with it. I would say, I would be lying if I said suicide doesn't cross my mind because of the pain and because of the hurt, but also see the ripple effects that it causes. And I've got a 16 and a 4-year-old son that I can't afford to not handle this right because I'm teaching them the wrong way if I do.
Tell them they're all in our prayers, man.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Representative, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.